sisters and brothers, all siblings in Christ. There is joy in the presence of the angels of God. Every time we turn toward our home and remember who we are. So with open hearts, let us pray. Creator of the universe, we imagine that we are in familiar territory, that we know what to expect of this hour, that we need much the way we came. Do not abandon us to our foolishness. In judgment, illumine our darkness. In mercy, bear us home until we recognize your presence wherever injustice is confronted, truth is spoken, and life restored. Friends, no one is without sin. No one can say that they have never thought a bad thought about someone else. No one can say that they have ever not slighted their neighbor at some point or another. But all of us can say that we are redeemed, that we are people who have received grace upon grace, even when that grace was not deserved. Because that grace comes not from a judge, an earthly judge, but from God, from Christ, who offers us unabounding love, unabounding mercy, to give us life anew so that we can build the community God has called us to be a part of. So friends, believe the good news of the gospel.
In Jesus Christ, we are forgiven. Amen.
Sort of like what we've done in the past, just a short time for sharing with people next to you. But for this morning's children's sermon or reflection, I would like you to just take a few moments to share a time when you asked either your parents or a family member or friend for something, whether it be a toy or a privilege like driving a car or anything along those lines. So just take a few moments now to turn to your neighbor to share a moment like that. If you have one, no forcing of sharing.
When I was a kid, I asked my dad. It was like my first two-wheeler.
Well, when my first two-wheeler I got from my brother Keith. I wanted it. He got it from somewhere. He knew it was too small for him. But he negotiated the deal for me to get it. And then I looked right
What's that?
on Cemetery Hill. That was a little bit too big. I couldn't get on without bucket.
Here.
How did you get off?
That was pretty easy. But I needed a 5-gallon bucket to get onto it.
You're on.
And I did solve the problem of what I could do when I want to get back on it later. And that was to tie a rope on the bucket. The bucket came along.
Okay, so as we come back together, I'm sure you shared some stories together with one another.
We still are.
You can keep sharing the coffee bottle this morning. It's always a risk. You're opening maybe Pandora's box each and every time, but it's good to know that you have a lot you want to share. I was telling Karen, our accompanist, that I remember as a kid, my parents, they weren't against video games, but it was before all the it was before smartphones, before all the computer games that we had. And I remember having asked my parents when I was a child to start playing some of these games that were coming out, and I can remember at first that they were very hesitant. As maybe parents out there that you have felt, and that as we read the scripture this morning, we find that asking for things can be hard, and sometimes the answer we get in return is hard because it puts us in a vulnerable position. But it reminds us, as we will see in the scripture reading today, how it reminds us of our relationship with God and how in our persistent asking we might find that we receive the things that we actually do need to fill our hearts. So with that, let us continue on in worship this morning.
Morning.
I've been feeling younger at heart talking to my grandson. Follow me, let's say a prayer for the nation. By the power of your Spirit, make us ancient words live, that we might be shaped into your people, eager to bear your plain world, and to give flesh to your future. For we pray in the name of Christ, who leads us into life. Amen. Today's first reading is from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 31, verses 31 to 34, found on page 35 in the Old Testament Read Bible. Story of the New Covenant. The days are surely to come, says the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. It will not be like the covenant that I made with your ancestors when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land made by their ancestors, when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, a covenant that they broke. Though I was their husband, says the Lord, but this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after these days, says the Lord. I will put my law with them, and I will write it into their hearts. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. No longer shall they teach one another, or say to each other, know the Lord. For they shall know me, and for the least of them, to the greatest of them, says the Lord. I will forgive their iniquity, and remember their sins no more. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Amen.
Our second reading this morning comes to us from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 18, verses 1 to 8. Hear now the word of the Lord. Then Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and not to lose heart. He said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. In that city there was a widow who kept coming to him, saying, "Grant me justice against my opponent." For a while he refused. But later he said to himself, "Though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice, so that she may not wear me out by continually coming." And the Lord said, Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God grant justice to his chosen ones who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? I tell you, he will quickly grant justice to them. And yet when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? Let us pray. Almighty God, we ask that as the Scripture has been read and your word is proclaimed, that your Spirit may come and dwell among us, that it open our minds, that it soften our hearts, so that as we hear what we need to hear today, that it may shape us and mold us, that it may push us to be your hands and feet in this world, as we act as co-laborers, as co-creators with you in your mission here. We ask these things in your most holy name. Amen. We hear a cry for justice in this morning's reading from a widow who has been ignored by a judge. I don't think our English translation gives enough credit to this widow. Because when you start breaking down some of the Greek, you find that this judge is pretty worried. When the judge says that he does not want to be worn out, it's almost like a boxing term that he's using. This widow just keeps coming at him with jab after jab, round after round, and she is not relenting. But even that being said, why should we care about the widow in this parable? It's not like we should be surprised that the widow was being denied the justice, the vindication that she deserved. Yet there is something else that is troubling about this parable, that should startle us, that should shake us up to see that things are not the way they should be. What should strike us in this morning's reading is the poignant question that Jesus poses. When the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? There's a lot to unpack in this question. But at the heart, we might find that Jesus is worried that by the time he comes back, nothing will be different. You see, the act of faith is an act that should challenge the very norms we have come to know and embrace. Faith takes us to the places where people are hurting, where people are wrestling with depression, with grief, with trauma, abuse. Faith takes us to the hidden corners where we have tried to make marginal people invisible. And faith should bring us to a place where those who are supposed to be the models of faith are just, in reality, as broken as the rest of us. All of this is to say that faith challenges us to hear the cries of justice and to seek out their vindication in the name of God's justice that is inscribed on all of our hearts. I've really enjoyed doing the Bible study we've been doing here at church, where we're skimming through the Old Testament. And that's a plug. If you haven't been yet, I encourage you to. It's been fun for a number of reasons, but the top I found is that I've most enjoyed the insights from the people who have attended it. Mainly how we've talked about how the Old Testament is filled with women and men who have made mistakes. People who in reality are almost like you and me. But out of that brokenness, the brokenness of these individuals, God finds a way to use the pieces that are left to bring the restoration and healing that is needed. It fits the theme of what we've been talking about in this study, and it fits the theme of this passage, especially when we in this study have looked at Genesis 1 and 2, where God created humankind to be co-laborers, co-creators. That means that you and I play a part of the unfolding narrative of this world. And if that sounds like a really big responsibility, that's because it is. But it's also a blessing. It's a blessing when we are able to give ear to the widow, the orphan, the ones who have been seeking justice for as long as they can remember. And in the times when their voices fall on deaf ears, that's when you and I come into play. I don't know if many of us could imagine what it was like to be in the position of the widow who persistently went after the judge in order to reach his ears. A judge who also did not fear God. I don't know if there's anyone here who could imagine ourselves in that position. Because what kind of persevering prayer, what kind of constant knocking did that widow have to do to receive the justice that she so sought? In a commentary I read about this passage, it kind of talked about an elderly black minister who said, "Until you have stood for years at a locked door, your knuckles bleeding, you don't really know what prayer is." And to some extent that's true. But yet also maybe we do know a little bit what it's like to be in the widow's place. Perhaps we know because we've stood knocking at the door praying for a loved one. Or maybe it's because there was a father or a mother or son or daughter, nephew or niece who has mourned the loss of one taken by unjust hands or an unjust system. I don't know your life story, but to some degree I would bet that you do know what it's like to have blood dripping down your hand from knocking on the door and waiting for a response, an answer to the things that needed attention in your life. Our lives may feel like an endless string of prayers. Those prayers may feel unanswered. They may make us feel frustrated. They may even make us feel angry. The thing, though, is that is okay. It is in the persistence of our prayers, the prayers that are written on our hearts and the prayers in our actions, where we find that we come to sit in the balance and the tension of God's mysterious actions and our own desires. We do not know everything that will come our way, or when the hurdles that we face will cease. All we know is that life, a life of prayer, is a cycle. It's a cycle of asking, seeking, knocking, and waiting, and trust that can sometimes grow weary. But that is what it means to have a persistent and an even healthy view of faith and prayer. I think we should be a little concerned if prayer is something that only brings a smile to our face. Because we know, like the widow, faith and prayer can be hard. That is the kind of faith, the kind of prayer, the kind of world-moving acts that Jesus is hoping he will find when he returns. It's not about people who are pious. It's not about people who have all the right answers, who have lived life perfectly and have everything in a right and proper order. if they're good Presbyterians. But it is about people with bleeding knuckles, who have never stopped seeking justice, who never gave up, who kept fighting for the rights, the voices of others and themselves until the law of God has brought vindication to all of them. The power in this morning's reading is that we are told of what could be, if only we set our minds on one another and God instead of ourselves. Because if the unjust judge who did not fear God and did not have respect for other people could grant justice, imagine what exponential good could come about when those of us who have faith, who have a respect for one another, having those things instilled on our hearts, imagine what could happen if we were to act then with justice, love, and mercy. I feel like I've used that word instilled, or the phrase written on our hearts a few times this morning. And that's because I hope you picked up on that. I'm alluding to the hope that is found for us in the reading from Jeremiah. The prophet tells us that God says, I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. In the midst of our knocking, in the midst of our perpetual longings, we will find that God has written on our hearts the things that are needed to give us a glimpse into what life together with God and one another can truly be. And that glimpse into what things could be and should be in our current, it's a glimpse of what could be and what should be in our current reality, if we were not bound by the forces that keep us from seeing the image of God in one another. While in prison for participating in a non-violent demonstration, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote a letter from his prison cell in the Birmingham jail. A part of that letter that still speaks to us and to this parable from the Gospel according to Luke says this: Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. And I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of neutrality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Our lives are intricately connected to one another. The injustice that the widow experienced impacts all of us, whether we know it or not. It may not have that explicit result, but it reflects on our own spiritual well-being when we let the cries of persistent prayers go unanswered. You see, you and I are the hands and the feet of Christ. Those of us who are God-fearing have the power to answer those prayers as well, to bring justice, to answer the prayers of one another as well in our own perpetual work as it goes on, living in a community that is driven by our faith and our prayers. The immediate reward of granting such justice, granting such prayers, may not be grand. But we would surely feel confident or find some kind of hope, resolution, in knowing then what Christ would find when he returns. So who are, or what are, the unjust judges in your lives? Who or what needs relentless pleading for justice and restoration? And in what ways can we answer God's question of how much more needs to go on? In what ways can our lives more faithfully co-labor with God in the pursuit of justice and wholeness and reconciliation? justice, God's justice, God's justice of wholeness, is in the here and now. It shouldn't be a dream. It shouldn't be a dream that we think of coming at some distant point in time. But it's a reality. It all comes down to whether or not our lives are willing to endure and persist for the sake of love and faith, that one day our work will bring healing to those who need it. Healing to those in this church, healing and justice to those in our community, healing and justice and wholeness to those who live beyond our state and beyond wherever it is God is calling us to be. Our second hymn this morning is 525. Here I am.
Thank
may we extend the peace of our Lord Jesus Christ to one another, saying, peace of Christ be with you.
And also with you.
You think you skipped by me? How are you, Loretta? I'm good.
Let us continue on in our service by setting aside a time to lift up both joys and concerns. So are there any joys or concerns that people would like to share together this morning? Joe?
A week away, but Jane and I have been married 41 years.
Rosemary, did you have something? Or?
Yes, Steve Fasten, my brother-in-law, is journeying through his grief.
Steve?
Steve.
Mary?
I'm thankful my son Phil's got a better job, starts Monday for $20 an hour. My cousin passed away, so.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh.
You please join me in a word of prayer. Almighty God, we give you thanks that we have an opportunity in our busy lives to come together. That we are able to come together, that we are able to feel your presence, wrestle with your presence. That we know, though, that as we sit with each and every one of us who are gathered here, that there is a piece of you inside. That all of us who are created in the image of God may be bearers of your love and your peace and compassion. As we journey through life that can be tumultuous and filled with hardships, that we are reminded that we don't have to overcome those things alone. And we give you thanks for the opportunities in which we are able to show that love and support, in which we build one another up, O Lord, as you have called us to be your hands and your feet in this world. As we look around, we give you thanks for this beautifully and wonderfully created world. And we ask that as we can enjoy its treasures, that we are able to be good stewards of it, that we are able to care for your creation, and that we are able to preserve its beauties and resources for generations to come. And as we look around us, O Lord, we ask for those who help lead us, those in our community, those in our churches, those who lead us on every level, O Lord, that your spirit of discernment and judgment may be with them as well. God, we pray for all those in our communities, those who protect us, those who help heal us, who teach us, who partake in every bit of what it means to live life together. we know that without one another, O Lord, we could do nothing by ourselves. As we take a moment to reflect these beauties of the changing seasons, we lift up, O Lord, those on our hearts this morning. We give thanks for 41 years that Joe and Jane have spent together in marriage. We give you thanks for Phil, O Lord, and ask that as he goes into a new job, that he may do the things that he needs to do well, and that the gifts and talents that you have given to him may thrive. We ask prayers, O Lord, for Steve as he goes through the stages of grief, and we know how hard that can be. We pray, O Lord, for those who continue to mourn and celebrate the life of Herman, and ask that as those who he was cherished by, O Lord, that pieces of his memory and his life still live on in all those, O Lord, who cherished him. God, in all these seasons of life, the highs and the lows and everything in between, we remember, O Lord, all those who are on the prayer list in the bulletin, and those, O Lord, who are on the prayers that are written on our hearts. So we take a moment this morning, O Lord, to lift those prayers up to you. Each and every one of us has been beautifully and wonderfully made. You know the things that are on our hearts, and we lift them up to you. And knowing that each and every one of us continue living on in this world filled with your Spirit, we know that it connects us with all the saints of heaven, those who have come before us and those, O Lord, who are to come. And with that faith and with that confidence, we join in saying the prayer that your Son, Jesus Christ, taught us to pray. Saying, Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Are there any announcements that people would like to make this morning? Lisa.
We started the Thanksgiving collection for CAP last week, and there's a sign-up sheet in the library. All the collected items are due by November 10th.
Mary.
I just wanted to thank Joanne and Lloyd for the great dinner dance with you.
Thank you for everyone who helped out with the dinner dance last night. And Joanne, I assume that's related?
Yes, it's very related. We could not have had a dinner dance without help from all the people who participated in it. I want to thank Suzanne and Kathy for promoting the dance, and Alan, Marianne, Barbara Smith, and Barbara even brought a friend who wasn't from the church, didn't know us, and they were both extremely helpful. Rebecca, Kevin, Lloyd, and Pastor Casey. Thank you all for making it.
I didn't
Well, you came and did a blessing. That was good. You came and did a blessing.
Okay.
Yeah. So I did look at, how we did, and it looks like a net profit of $335.
Any other announcements this morning? I will say that did someone have their hand up? Oh, okay. Sorry, I just saw movement. I will say that we did raise over, as a whole, all the teams who walked for the Trump Walk, we raised over $9,000 for Putnam Calf. Based off of conversations with all you, it sounds like you really enjoyed walking, so trying to get together a time when we can maybe get a small walking group together to do that on occasions together with one another. And normally we would have Bible study this week, but I'll be visiting my sister who lives in Massachusetts this Thursday, so we won't meet this Thursday, but we'll meet the following Thursday. Are there any other announcements? Oh, don't miss. Oh yeah, that's it. Well, there's lots of other announcements in the bulletin, but if you haven't already done so, November 3rd will be All Saints Day. So I'm planning a special service for us to remember those who have passed. And so if there's a name that you would like to have read during that service of remembrance, please send it to either Kathy or myself if you have not already done so. And you may hear some special music as well. Not me, but someone else. So it'll be something to look forward to make the service special. If there is nothing else then, announcement-wise, let us take a moment of our time now in our worship to reflect on the things that God has given us as we give back a portion of the things we have received. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Ghost, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, dead, and buried. He descended into hell. The third day he rose again from the dead. He ascended into heaven, and sitteth on the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From thence he shall come to judge the quick and the dead. I believe in the Holy Ghost, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen. Our final hymn this morning is 403. What a friend we have in Jesus.
Amen.
Scripture and God's amazing grace, walking forward together in worship and prayer, serving God's children with humility and care. Come, brother, with us.
So friends, may you go out into the world ever so persistent. Persistent in prayers, persistent of your love for one another, and persistence for your desire for justice for all God's children. And doing that, then, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you now and forevermore in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost.